My girl, my baby girl. I miss you. I need you home.
Tonight, the family of Ashley Shingoose speaks out about her disappearance.
More cultural-based stuff, more land-based stuff, getting them in touch with their spirituality and the culture.
A big impact from a tiny home.
The other part is addressing the harms that have been caused by colonization.
And Liberal MPs return to work in Ottawa, and the Indigenous caucus meets. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. A father from St. Theresa Point First Nation is heading home from Winnipeg with no news on his missing daughter. Albert Shingoose says it's been very hard and will be hard to go home without knowing where his daughter Ashley is. APTN's Leanne Sanders has the story.
My girl, my baby girl. I miss you. I need you home.
Albert Shingoose says searching for his 31-year-old daughter, missing since last year, has been emotional for him. Shingoose has searched for Ashley whenever he could make the long trip from his northeastern Manitoba reserve. This time, he had help from volunteers with the Bear Clan Patrol, but still no sign of his daughter.
It was very sensitive for me to do that walk with the Bear Clan, but it was a bit easy that I know the Bear Clan had been there for me and for everyone that needed that help.
Albert and his wife care for several grandchildren at St. Theresa Point, including 2 of Ashley's 3 children. He says searching is exhausting.
It was tough for the past 2 weeks since I've been here in Winnipeg, looking every night. Sometimes I stay out till 2 o'clock in the morning, come home tired.
Ashley was last seen in the area of Henry Avenue and Main Street, March 11th, 2022. Search team members from St. Theresa Point and Bear Clan Patrol members say while there have been sightings reported to them in recent days, none have been confirmed. The family is also still awaiting word from police on DNA testing being done to determine the identity of Buffalo Woman, the 4th unidentified victim of a Winnipeg serial killer.
Myself, my wife, and my oldest daughter had provided a DNA, and they said 30 to 60 days for that thing to come back. I don't want to think in a bad way. I want to think in a good way, like she's around. I want to think that she's here. She's around.
Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
To Ottawa now, where Parliament resumes sitting next week, and Liberal MPs were back Thursday for caucus meetings. One of those meetings was the Indigenous caucus. Nova Scotia MP Jaime Baptiste is its chair, and APTN News spoke to him before he went into the meeting. Baptiste said there would be 3 themes discussed.
Where are you from? These are things around housing, water, infrastructure, First Nations policing, health. The other part is addressing the harms that have been caused by colonization, that have been caused by policy, that have been caused by the Indian residential schools, and making sure that we're addressing that harm and making sure that we're doing what we can to create healing within the communities, create the supports that are needed in the community. And the last theme that we look at is creating pathways to prosperity.
There have been 2 more announcements this week of more anomalies found on the grounds of residential schools. For more on this, we're joined by Kimberly Murray, the Independent Special Interlocutor for Missing Children and Unmarked Graves. Kim, thanks for being with us. Another difficult week, of course, as more and more anomalies are being found just this week in Saddle Lake and Williams Lake. What's your reaction to what we've been hearing this week?
Well, I would say obviously it's disturbing every time we have a new recovery that happens or announcement, but it's not surprising. As we said, this is going to be our new reality for a while now as more and more communities do their ground penetrating radar searches. I think that we're going to just keep having these announcements on a weekly basis until all the communities are finished.
Mm-hmm. Your office had its third gathering in Vancouver just last week, and records were a prime focus. So what needs to happen to get those records into the hands of people who can use them to uncover the truth about residential school deaths?
Yeah, that's right. We had our third national gathering, and it was actually focused on Indigenous data sovereignty and the OCAP principles of ownership, control, access, and possession of records. So we heard over and over again from survivors and community members that things need to change. That these records can actually help find and identify the missing children, and that more access needs to be made available quicker. And there was a lot of discussion about changes to the law and changes to the legislation for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. So it's a very important part of the new legal framework that I'm supposed to recommend to the federal government.
Like you say, you're working on that legal framework, a new one, but how possible is it to achieve data sovereignty?
Well, I mean, I think it's possible, and everybody certainly is advocating for it now within Indigenous communities. We have seen a lot of progress in some nations around governance over their own records. So it's really important that we all work together and continue to have conversations and share best practices, how we can move forward to obtain ownership and access and possession of the records.
What will be your focus coming up in the next few months?
We are planning our fourth national gathering, and that is focusing on Indigenous laws. We will be bringing elders, survivors, and knowledge keepers together to talk about what are our Indigenous laws and how do we incorporate them into the current colonial laws to protect the burial sites and to obtain access to the burial sites and also to obtain access to the records. And as always, I continue to visit communities and meet with the teams that are doing the sacred work of searching for the children and helping in any way that I can.
Well, Kim, we know you got a lot of work to do in a short period of time. Appreciate you taking some of that time for us today. Thank
you very much.
Time now for us to take a quick break. Coming up, tiny homes that are making a big difference. Stick around. Welcome back. Lives are changed for the better as a handful of unsheltered residents in Winnipeg finally have a safe place to call their own. Sav Jonesa visited Astum Apinikinak to learn more.
David Redsky checks on drying sage gathered last summer. He says it's important for healing mental wounds.
It's cleansing. It makes them feel safe, and they say a little prayer in their mind. And
Redsky is a support mentor for the residents of Astum Apinikinak, a new transitional housing project in Winnipeg's downtown core. Indigenous people account for around 70% of Winnipeg's houseless population, and Redsky says the Indigenous-led initiative is sure to provide healing in a culturally significant way.
More cultural-based stuff, more land-based stuff, getting them in touch with their spirituality and the culture. That would also probably help their addictions and their mental health, because I believe that their spirituality and culture is a big thing in them moving ahead and doing better in their life.
Set up as a community, the 22 bachelor-style units face each other and form a circle around a sacred fire pit. They have access to a larger kitchen, laundry, and a meeting space through the main building.
So when you're out fighting every day for food, shelter, warmth, clothing, you can't stabilize because you're constantly working every day just to get those few necessities.
Input from houseless people around the city was integral to the development of the project. Coordinator Melissa Stone says a sense of safety was a common need.
Every night and every day they're worried about their safety and their items being taken, looking for food, bathing, right? Like one of the fellows bathed in the river every day, and then when it froze, he was unable to bathe. So when he moved in here, he had a shower, he had a warm bed and a warm home to sleep in, and he didn't sleep the whole night because he was on the streets for 5+ years, but he felt safe.
Having a safe place to live can be taken for granted by those who haven't experienced living on the streets. But as Stone shows us around, she mentions living isn't the only thing people can finally do safely here.
When we were meeting people, doing outreach and getting advice, we found that there was a lot of people that are dying on the streets. Some folks go for chemo, some folks don't have the ability to get there. Once again, those barriers for health. So we made sure that we saved some rooms for them, that they would be able to die in peace and to have a home and to have the support and to have the love. We felt it was very necessary for them to trust us in telling us their stories of not having a safe place to die.
End Homelessness is a partner organization involved with Stem AP In their 2022 Winnipeg Street Census Report, which looks at the demographics of unsheltered people, they found nearly 9 in 10, or 89% of people who slept outdoors in abandoned buildings, tents, vehicles, encampments, or other public locations were Indigenous. In contrast, they reported 50% of the people staying in shelters are non-Indigenous. Stone says it is policy-made barriers that are to blame.
They've gone to many different places. You can't come here because you're under the influence of this and that. You can't go on EIA because you have a warrant for drug possession. There's just so many barriers for people that keeps them. We as a society and as a community, unfortunately, with our policies and our laws, keep people houseless.
Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Such a great initiative. Well, we are just days away from the start of the Arctic Winter Games. More on that coming up on Sports with Stranger after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Today's picture comes from TJ Way in Ottawa, Ontario. A pair of buds here, a shot of a boreal chickadee and a black-capped chickadee eating together. Thanks for sharing. If you want to be featured as our photo of the day, you can email your shots to share@aptn.ca or tag APTN News on Instagram. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 2 with flurries in Halifax, 0 with snow in Charlottetown. -30 and sunny in Kuujjuaq, 16 below in Nain. -7 in Montreal, 5 below for Val-d'Or. -3 and snow in Sault Ste. Marie, 2 below with flurries in North Bay. -8 in Thunder Bay, 12 below for Sioux Lookout. -22 with snow in God's Lake, 17 below in Norway House. -8 in Winnipeg, -14 for Dauphin. 9 below with snow in Regina, +3 and snow in Saskatoon. -17 for Meadow Lake, snow and 19 below in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 18 below with snow in Fort Chip, -16 with snow in Fort McMurray. -14 for Edmonton, 0 with snow in Lethbridge. +7 in Vancouver, 5 in Kamloops. +1 for Prince George and Smithers. -21 in Old Crow, 3 below for Whitehorse. -27 in Yellowknife, snow and 21 below in Norman Wells. -25 for Sax Harbor and Pawlatuck. -40 in Chesterfield, 39 below in Whale Cove. -31 in Resolute and Joe Haven. The Arctic Winter Games take place this weekend in Alberta, and with the games on the horizon, our Daryl Stranger is looking at the upcoming games in this week's Sports with Stranger.
Hello everyone, I am back at the sports desk today with the Arctic Winter Games in Alberta just a few days away now, back for the first time in a few years, I might add, due to the pandemic. I wanted to use this time to highlight some of the stories our wonderful reporters have done so far. Now, Sarah Connors brought this heartwarming story about 2 brothers that will be competing next week.
Colin Sayas and his team are practicing the 1-foot and 2-foot high kick. A traditional game originally played by the Inuit, it requires athletes to use explosive force while keeping their balance. At 13, Sayas is the youngest athlete from the Yukon to compete in Arctic sports at the upcoming Arctic Winter Games.
For my age, I think I'm really good, and that competing against older people is kind of scary, but this one's just gonna be fun. And
Sayas is a member of the Kawanni First Nation. He's one of a few First Nations athletes from the Yukon that will compete in Arctic sports at this year's Games. One of the others is his older brother, 16-year-old Hudson. The Games will be their first major sporting event outside of the Yukon.
Honestly, couldn't ask for more. I love the kid. We've done everything together, so it's kind of just amazing, both of us going to our first major event together.
The Arctic Winter Games is a high-profile circumpolar sport competition for northern and Arctic athletes. Held every 2 years, it includes sports like alpine skiing, curling, and hockey. This year's Games will be the first since 2018 after they were canceled in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
And Kent Driscoll got a look at the uniforms for the Nunavut team, including the colors of the territory and a Nunavut pin set, which when collected together shows Inuit making an igloo. And as Nunavut's Minister of Community and Government Services notes, this team has waited a long time due to the last Games being canceled by COVID.
This is an especially significant mark today, since it's the first Arctic Winter Games since 2018, when the South Slave region in the NWT hosted.
And with all of the focus on the sports, Jess Croucher has assisted in the creation of 2 special exhibits on MMIWG and residential schools that will run alongside the Games.
Yeah, absolutely. So the exhibits are a response to the long-standing tradition of pin trading at the Arctic Winter Games. So Eden Boulier, Allison Platt requested that we host some culturally rich creative activities for pin collectors to earn their pins. So our work is primarily centered on Indigenous art and activism, so it only made sense to go down that path. We have one exhibit which is from the Legacy of Hope Foundation called Generations Lost, Healing the Legacy of Residential Schools. It's an interactive exhibit that shares a 100-year timeline on the creation and implementation of residential school system in Canada, as well as steps towards healing and our historical resilience as Indigenous peoples. And the second exhibit we're hosting is an art gallery called Honor and Remember for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit Plus peoples, and missing, murdered, and exploited Indigenous peoples. So this exhibit will hold artworks, paintings, beadwork, soapstone carvings, some really beautiful memorial pieces from our local people to tell our stories around this issue.
The Arctic Winter Games runs from January 29th until February the 4th and includes so many cool sports like the 1- and 2-foot high kicks, knuckle hop, snowshoeing, and so many more. We will bring you all the action right here on APTN News. That's it for me. Back to you, Dennis.
I think I'd be really good at the 1-foot high kick. Okay, thanks, Daryl. Over to Ottawa now, where Annette Francis is standing by with a preview of tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
Tonight on Nation to Nation, we'll hear from Senator Patrick Brazeau. It's his first sit-down interview with APTN since 2016. He'll talk about a private member's bill he's tabled. If passed, it would require warning labels on alcohol products. Brazeau also opens up about struggles before he reached sobriety.
You know, I'm just lucky to be alive today because I did wake up from an induced coma 2 days after I tried to commit suicide.
We'll also hear how a deal between 6 First Nations in New Brunswick and the province could cost them millions in revenue. That's coming up after the news.
Thanks, Annette. Looking forward to hearing from the Senator. A new episode of APTN Investigates debuts right here tomorrow night. It's about a silent epidemic of sexual abuse across Treaty 3 territory in northwestern Ontario. Survivors say the only way to stop it is by talking about it. Here's a preview of APTN Investigates Buried Truths.
Intimacy between two people, that's a sacred thing. When you do that to somebody, it really, really destroys their spirit. It's like you take something from them. And most people that I know, like my friends that are my age, a lot of them are gone down a path of addiction. Every single one of them was sexually abused. It's so deeply rooted. Everybody at home knows who the abusers are. Light gets rid of dark. That's the only thing that does. Bringing light, the 8th fire, the prophecy, like it's time to light that up, show what's going on, and it's time now.
And there is more on this upcoming episode of APTN Investigates right now on our website, aptnnews.ca. We'll also be joined by Kenneth Jackson right here tomorrow on the newscast ahead of the airing of that documentary. That is all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.